You know, for over a century, the basic formula for school has been pretty much the same. A teacher stands at the front of the room and lectures, and then students go home to try and figure out the homework on their own. But what if that whole model, the one we all experienced, is completely and totally upside down?
Yeah, it's a big question, right? But it's at the very heart of this huge movement in education, a movement that basically suggests that we've been using our most precious resource, that time we have together, in person, with an expert, in the worst way possible.
Okay, so let's get into it. The solution people are talking about is a model called the Flipped classroom. And yeah, it does exactly what it sounds like. It flips the entire traditional teaching process right on its head.
So what on earth does that actually mean? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The lecture, the part where the teacher explains new stuff, that doesn't happen in class anymore. Instead, students watch it at home, on their own schedule, usually as a video. And what that does is it frees up all of that valuable class time for what we used to call homework, actually doing the work, practicing, collaborating on projects, all with the teacher right there to help when you get stuck.
To really get a handle on this, let's just compare the old way with the new way. I think the best way to understand this whole shift is to imagine you're learning how to cook a really complicated new recipe.
Okay, so in the traditional model, you'd go to class and you just sit there passively while a chef lectures you about the recipe. Then they send you home all by yourself to actually try and cook it. And of course you get stuck, you get frustrated, and there's nobody there to help. The flipped model just completely reverses that. At home, you watch a video of the chef actually making the dish, you can pause it, you can rewind, you prep yourself. Then you go into the kitchen, the classroom, to cook alongside the expert chef. They're right there to give you tips and correct your technique in real time. See the difference? You're not struggling alone, you're actively practicing with an expert.
Now, that sounds great in theory. It makes a lot of sense. But you know us, we always have to ask, what does the data say? Does flipping the classroom actually make a difference in how well students learn?
Well, the evidence piled up pretty fast. Back in 2020, a systematic review, which is just a fancy way of saying a really high-quality study that pulls together all the research on one topic, looked at 21 different experiments. And the result? It was kind of a landslide. In 18 out of those 21 studies, the flipped classroom model got better results than the old school way.
And then in 2023, the big one dropped. A huge meta-analysis that combined the data from 61 different studies with over 4,000 students. And it found an effect size of 0.99. Now, I'm just going to say it. In the world of education research, an effect size of 0.99 is absolutely massive. It points to a really, really strong positive impact on student learning.
But, the good science is all about being skeptical of your own results. Researchers know that studies with big, exciting findings are more likely to get published. It's called publication bias. So they ran the numbers again to account for that possibility. And yeah, the effect size dropped a bit, but it was still a sig of 0.58. And let me be clear, that is still a very substantial, very meaningful positive effect.
I mean, the researchers themselves put it pretty bluntly. They said the results showed that flipped classrooms outperformed traditional classrooms, period. Based on all the evidence, it just works better.
Okay, so we've established that it's effective. The next question, the more interesting one, is when is it most effective? Because, as always, the devil's in the details.
Well, the research points to something interesting. It seems like the students who get the biggest boost are the ones who are already at a higher proficiency level. And that kind of makes sense, right? If you're already a bit more advanced, you're probably better at that self-directed learning you need to do at home, which means you can really take full advantage of that practice time in class.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. The model's power seems to change a lot depending on what's being taught. Look at this. For skills like writing or speaking, the effect sizes are astronomical, 1.50 and 1.14. But then you look at something like vocabulary, and the effect is way smaller, only 0.25. So what's going on here? Why the giant difference?
This chart perfectly shows the secret sauce of the flipped model. It's an absolute rock star at teaching procedural skills, things you have to do to learn. Writing and speaking aren't things you just memorize. They're complex skills that need practice, practice, and more practice with expert feedback. And that's exactly what the flipped model creates space for. Vocabulary, on the other hand, a lot of that is just memorization, which doesn't need that same level of in-class coaching.
But let's be real, nothing is a magic bullet. No single model is perfect. So to get the full story, we have to look at the challenges too. So researchers have definitely flagged a few common hurdles. For students, it can feel like a heavier workload since they have to prep for class. there can be real issues around access to technology and reliable internet. For teachers, it's a lot more prep time, creating all those videos and materials. And probably the biggest thing is that it all hinges on students being proactive enough to actually do the prep work before they show up.
So yeah, those challenges are real, and they absolutely need to be addressed. But here's the bottom line. When you look at all the evidence, the debate about if the flipped classroom works is pretty much over. The research is clear. It is a more effective way to learn.
The entire conversation has shifted. The big question for educators and for all of us today isn't whether we should flip our classrooms, but how. How do we design these experiences to be amazing? How do we tackle those challenges? And most importantly, how do we adapt this really powerful model to help every single student reach their full potential?